I lost family just as everybody else did. And still to this day, I'm grieving and trying to cope with it.
He loves every single one of us. So for him to be seen as a monster, it breaks my heart because that's just not who he is.
A community is in shock, and there are so many unanswered questions tonight. What happened inside a Northeast Side home, and why did 6 people, including an unborn baby, lose their lives?
A shock to this entire Northeast Indianapolis neighborhood. 6 people, including a pregnant woman and her unborn child, found dead in this home on Adams Street.
What we saw this morning was a different kind of evil.
I'm angry. I'm ashamed.
What happened this morning was a mass murder. This senseless terror has no place in our community.
The hole you've left in my heart and in the hearts of everyone who loved them can never be filled. I wake up every day knowing they are gone because of that night.
In the early morning hours of January 24th, 2021, a 15-year-old boy named Xavier is sprinting through the freezing Indiana night. His feet hit the pavement near the intersection of 36th and Adams Street, but he isn't alone. Behind him, his own brother is closing the gap. Xavier doesn't reach for a phone. He doesn't look for a weapon. Instead, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out the only thing he has left to negotiate with. Through the cold air, he gasps out a sentence that would later haunt a Marion County courtroom. "I can give you $40. Please, just don't do this." What led a teenager to offer $40 to his own brother in exchange for his life? And how did a simple argument over a curfew just minutes earlier leave an entire family home silent? Today, we go inside 3500 Adams Street to look at the security camera footage that changed everything, the methodical path taken through a bi-level home, and the final 2026 ruling that officially sealed the fate of Raymond Childs III. Welcome to the Dark Minds. Today, we're dissecting a case that defies logic and tests the limits of the complex trauma defense. Before we dive into the evidence, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a deep dive. To understand what happened inside 3500 Adams Street, you first have to understand how the house was built and how that architecture created a tragic separation between the family members that night. The home was a classic Indiana bi-level. On the upper floor, life was loud and busy. This was where the children stayed: 18-year-old Elijah, 13-year-old Rita, and 15-year-old Xavier. It was also where Elijah's girlfriend Kiara Hawkins was spending her final days of pregnancy, preparing for a life that was supposed to begin in just 1 week. But downstairs, in the basement, the atmosphere was different. This was the sanctuary of Raymond Childs Jr. and his wife, Kezzy. At 42 years old, Kezzy was in a period of forced stillness. She was recovering from a recent surgery, an ordeal that made the simple act of climbing the stairs a painful, near impossible task. Because Raymond Jr. wanted to ensure his wife was never truly isolated while she healed, he turned to technology. He installed a sophisticated security camera system with a primary lens positioned in the first-floor living room. This wasn't just for protection from the outside world, it was a digital window. From her bed in the basement, Kezzy could pull up a feed on her device and see her children, hear the hum of the television, and feel connected to the household above without moving an inch. It was this very system that would later provide the most chilling context for the investigators. The tension that night didn't come out of nowhere. The defense would later argue that the home was a pressure cooker of complex trauma. But on the surface, the conflict was a universal one, a father's rules versus a son's rebellion. Raymond Childs III, just 17, had a history of pushing boundaries. When he walked through the door in the early hours of January 24th, he wasn't met with silence. He was met by his father. Raymond Jr. was tired of the late nights, tired of the broken curfews, and tired of the defiance. Witnesses and records suggest the argument was sharp and final. Raymond Jr. issued an ultimatum that every rebellious teenager fears, but few ever expect to hear. He told his son that he was done. He told Raymond III he was being kicked out of the house. In that moment, the digital window in the basement was active. The cameras were rolling. The dogs, 3 pit bulls, including a protective male named Rocky, remained calm, recognizing the voices of the 2 men they lived with. They saw no intruder. They saw no threat. They only saw a father trying to discipline a son. But as Raymond Jr. turned his back to head back down to the basement, believing the argument was over, the dynamic of the household shifted from a family dispute into something else entirely. The cameras captured the lead-up, the posture of the argument, and the finality of the father's words. What they couldn't capture was the internal snap of a 17-year-old who felt he had nothing left to lose. What followed the argument wasn't a sudden explosion of noise, but a terrifyingly methodical progression through the home. This is the part of the story where the architecture of 3500 Adams Street transformed from a family residence into a series of isolated corridors. The movement began in the basement. Down in that lower-level sanctuary, the argument over the curfew reached its final, silent conclusion. Raymond Jr. and Kezzy were in the space they considered safest, but the geography of the bi-level home meant there was nowhere left to retreat. In the stillness of the early morning, the quiet of the basement was permanently shattered. But it was the silence of the household's 3 pit bulls that spoke the loudest to investigators later that morning. Among them was Rocky, a dog known by the neighbors and the family to be fiercely territorial and aggressive toward anyone he didn't recognize. If a stranger had stepped through that door, Rocky would have sounded an alarm that would have alerted every soul on Adams Street. Instead, Rocky and the other 2 dogs remained eerily calm. They didn't bark, they didn't growl. They simply watched a person they knew move through the rooms. This lack of a canine response was the first major clue that the threat wasn't coming from the outside. It was already inside the walls. After the basement fell silent, the movement transitioned to the first floor. This was done with a deliberation that the prosecution would later use to dismantle any claim of a crime of passion. This wasn't a panicked reaction, it was a floor-by-floor, room-by-room journey. On that upper level, the youngest sister, 13-year-old Rita, was in her room, a space that should have been a fortress for a middle schooler. Nearby was 18-year-old Elijah and his girlfriend Kiara Hawkins. For Kiara, the tragedy carried a double weight. She was 19 years old and stood on the very precipice of motherhood. She was just days away from her delivery date, her bags likely packed, her mind focused on the arrival of her son, whom she had already named Chaos. As the movement continued through the hallway, the residents of the first floor were met with an unimaginable reality. One by one, the rooms were visited. Elijah, Kiara, and young Rita were all forced to confront the fact that the person standing before them was someone they had shared meals with, someone they had grown up with. Kiara's presence in the house that night was a testament to the family's closeness. She was there to be near Elijah as they prepared for Chaos's birth. Instead, that proximity placed her directly in the path of a methodical sequence that spared no one on that level. By the time the movement through the first floor was complete, the vibrant life of the Childs family had been reduced to a haunting stillness. The cameras in the living room, the dogs in their corners, and the very walls of 3500 Adams Street stood as the only witnesses to a sequence of events that lasted only minutes, but would take a lifetime to comprehend. But the silence inside the house was not absolute. There was one person who had witnessed the impossible, someone whose survival instinct managed to override the paralyzing shock of the morning's events. 15-year-old Xavier Childs had seen enough to know that his only hope lay beyond the front door. In a desperate burst of adrenaline, Xavier fled. He didn't just walk out, he ran into the biting January air, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he sprinted away from the only home he had ever known. He headed north, pushing his body toward the intersection of East 36th Street and Adams, hoping the distance would provide safety. But as he reached the corner, the sound of footsteps behind him grew louder. He wasn't alone. Raymond III had caught up to him. Imagine the scene at that dark intersection. 2 brothers, standing under the dim glow of the streetlights, surrounded by the silence of a sleeping neighborhood. There was no one to intervene, no one to call for help. Xavier was cornered, staring into the eyes of a sibling who had just methodically altered their family's lineage forever. It was here that Xavier reached for the only leverage he had left. It wasn't a weapon, and it wasn't an act of force. It was an act of pure, heartbreaking desperation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out $40, every cent he had to his name. He held it out, a small bundle of crumpled bills, a teenager's entire world, and offered it as a ransom for his life. The court records would later immortalize the haunting words he spoke in that moment. "I can give you $40. Please just don't do this." It was a plea that stripped away the complexities of the legal system and the trauma of the defense. It was a younger brother begging an older brother for mercy, offering the only thing of value he possessed in exchange for a chance to see the sun rise. For reasons known only to Raymond III, he didn't follow through at that intersection. He turned away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Xavier alone in the cold. Xavier didn't waste a single second. Driven by a terror that most people will never experience, he scrambled to a nearby neighbor's porch. He hammered on the door, his cries for help finally breaking the quiet of the 3,500 block.
The surviving brother says Raymond chased him out of the house. He told Raymond, "I can give you $40. Please don't shoot me." But his brother shot him in the leg, the arm, and tried to shoot him in the head. The 15-year-old boy is recovering in the hospital.
All of us need to rally around this individual for what they've had to endure. But yes, there are things that we can do to help with that assistance and that transition with not only the physical pain, but the emotional pain.
When the first police cruisers pulled up, sirens screaming and lights reflecting off the snow, they found a 15-year-old boy who was shattered but lucid. Before he was taken into the back of an ambulance, before the weight of his grief could even begin to settle, Xavier did the hardest thing a brother could do. He looked at the officers and gave them a name. He told them exactly who was responsible. In that moment, Xavier Childs became more than a survivor. He became the primary witness in a case that would take years to resolve, his identification at the neighbor's house serving as the first domino to fall in the long pursuit of justice. The wheels of justice are often described as grinding slowly, but in the case of Raymond Childs III, they seem to catch on the sheer weight of the tragedy. For 3 long years, the city of Indianapolis waited as the legal system prepared to address the events of Adams Street.
Well, tonight we are getting a better understanding of what really happened to a family killed in their home over the weekend. The mayor has been calling it a mass murder. And the court documents today now paint a picture of a horrific crime and crime scene. And it details how the teenage suspect shot his own family in a matter of minutes early on Sunday morning in their home located along Adams Street. It describes 17-year-old Raymond Childs III deliberately going from room to room, opening fire on his family, his siblings, his parents, as well as a woman who in just a matter of days would have given birth to his own nephew.
Investigators quickly narrowed their suspect search to Raymond Childs III after talking to the only survivor of the family murders. In this family photo, Raymond has his arm around his 15-year-old brother, the survivor, who told police what happened inside the home early Sunday.
When the first trial finally commenced on July 23, 2024, the air in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. This was supposed to be the moment of reckoning, but the human element of this case, the raw, unhealed grief, proved to be too volatile for the strict confines of the law. During the proceedings, a witness, overwhelmed by the proximity to the person who had altered their life forever, suffered a devastating emotional collapse. The outburst was so intense and so visceral that the judge ruled the jury's impartiality had been compromised. In an instant, months of preparation evaporated. A mistrial was declared. For Xavier and the extended family, it was a cruel reset button, forcing them to hold their breath for a few more months while the wounds remained wide open. But by October 2024, the doors of the Marion County Court swung open once again for the retrial. This time, the atmosphere was different, sterner, more focused.
Happening today, testimony is slated to start in the retrial of Raymond Childs. He's the man facing 6 murder charges in the shooting of several family members and a pregnant woman in Indianapolis in 2021. Childs was 17 at the time. Prosecutors say he started shooting after an argument over whether he was staying out too late. The gunfire killed his father, stepmother, 2 teenage relatives, and a pregnant woman. The child she was carrying did not survive, leading to the 6th murder charge. Childs' first trial ended in a mistrial back in July after a key witness spoke to Childs directly from the witness stand.
And in another trial here in central Indiana, opening statements are now set for tomorrow morning. In this case, where a man is accused of shooting and killing several of his family members.
The prosecution laid out a case that relied heavily on the methodical nature we discussed earlier. They painted a picture of a young man who didn't just snap, but who moved with a purpose that contradicted any claim of a temporary loss of control.
Raymond was apparently in trouble for leaving the house without permission. Police believe he went through the house shooting his parents, 2 teen siblings, and the pregnant girlfriend of his older brother. They all died, including the unborn baby boy.
The prosecution says Childs' 13-year-old sister died next.
He shot her once in the chest and left her for dead on the floor of her bedroom.
Then the prosecution says Childs III went to the basement where his parents were and allegedly killed them too.
I love you, Raymond, were the last words of Raymond Childs II.
The defense, in turn, leaned into the complex trauma narrative, trying to explain the unexplainable through the lens of a troubled upbringing and a mind shaped by conflict.
First, when he talked to the officers, he said he couldn't be sure who the perpetrator was. He also used the word they when referencing the shooters, and he couldn't be sure that he saw his brother with a gun that night.
Xavier Childs, now older but still carrying the weight of that January morning, took the stand. To look at his brother across a courtroom and recount the $40 plea was perhaps the most difficult task of the entire marathon. But his testimony was the anchor. When the case was finally handed over to the jury, many legal experts expected days of deliberation. The evidence was vast, the charges were sevenfold, and the implications were massive. Yet, the jury only needed 3 hours. In the world of high-stakes criminal trials, a 3-hour verdict is a lightning strike. It was a clear indication that the 12 men and women in that box didn't see a complex psychological puzzle. They saw a clear series of choices. On all 7 counts, 6 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, the verdict was guilty. The final chapter of this legal marathon arrived on March 10th, 2025. Judge Jane Magnus Stinson sat on the bench, facing a young man who had once argued over a curfew and was now facing the rest of his natural life behind bars. The sentencing was not just a formality, it was a statement. The judge handed down a sentence of 360 years. To ensure the public understood the gravity of the loss, she ordered 6 life sentences to be served consecutively. In the eyes of the court, the life of a father, a mother, a brother, a sister, a young woman, and a child yet to be born were not part of a single incident. They were 6 distinct, precious lives. And the 360-year sentence was the only way the law could mathematically represent the scale of the void left behind at 3500 Adams Street.
Raymond III is charged with 6 counts of murder, as well as attempted murder and carrying a gun without a license. Police recovered 2 guns that matched the shell casings found in the home.
An Indianapolis man is going to prison for the rest of his life for the murders of 6 of his family members.
Our Rich Knight takes us into the courtroom for that sentence that leaves surviving family still divided.
Raymond Childs III received a 360-year total sentence for the January 2021 murders inside his East Side Indianapolis house. Childs' parents, his 13-year-old sister, his 18-year-old brother, and his brother's 19-year-old almost full-term pregnant girlfriend were shot and killed. A 15-year-old brother who ran out of the house was shot twice but survived.
Even with a sentence of 360 years hanging over him, the legal story of Raymond Childs III refused to go quietly into the archives. In the months following that landmark judgment, the case moved from the emotional battlefield of the Marion County Courtroom to the sterile, paper-heavy halls of the Indiana Court of Appeals. As 2025 drew to a close, a team of appellate lawyers launched one final, desperate bid to rewrite the ending of this tragedy. The core of their argument rested on a single, controversial pivot: the age of the defendant at the time of the incident. Because Raymond was only 17 when he walked through the halls of his family home that morning, his defense claimed that a 3-century sentence was inappropriate. They argued that the law should account for the diminished culpability of a minor, that a teenage brain still forming and shaped by a history of family trauma was incapable of the same level of malice as an adult. They were asking the state to see Raymond not as a monster, but as a child who had reached a catastrophic breaking point. The wait for a decision stretched through the holidays, a period of agonizing uncertainty for everyone involved.
Raymond Childs III maintains his innocence, and at least some of his family believes him.
Now, the prosecutor in this case cannot seek the death penalty because the suspect is a juvenile. The potential maximum sentence for him would be life without parole.
Then, on December 31st, 2025, the very final day of the year, the Indiana Court of Appeals issued its memorandum decision. It was a document that would serve as the definitive closing of the book. The court's ruling was as cold and clear as the January air on Adams Street. They didn't just reject the appeal, they dismantled the logic behind it. The judges acknowledged his age, yes, but they balanced it against the sheer undeniable gravity of the crime. They pointed to the methodical and deliberate nature of the act, the way he had moved from room to room, floor to floor, sparing no one. In their early 2026 finality, the court stated that the loss of 5 family members and a child who had not yet taken his first breath outweighed any mitigating factors of youth or trauma. They affirmed that the 360-year sentence was a just reflection of the lives stolen. The ruling was a signal that the justice system would not equate minor status with a license for such a calculated erasure of an entire family tree. As the calendar turned fully into 2026, the appeals were exhausted. The legal loopholes were closed. For the first time in 5 years, the case of the Adams Street tragedy was no longer a pending matter. The 360-year sentence was no longer a headline. It was a permanent reality. Raymond Childs III would spend the rest of his existence within the walls of a state facility, far from the neighborhood where his brother Xavier still walks, carrying the weight of a story that the courts have finally finished writing. As of today, in 2026, Raymond Childs III is no longer a name on a docket or a face on a news scroll. He is a number in a database currently serving out the first few years of a 360-year sentence that ensures he will never again step foot on Adams Street. But as the legal books are shuttered and the heavy doors of the Indiana Court of Appeals close for the final time, a haunting question remains. One that even the most meticulous prosecutors and seasoned forensic psychologists couldn't answer. Throughout the years of litigation, the defense leaned heavily on the concept of a breaking point. They painted a picture of a mind fractured by years of internal family trauma, a pressure cooker that finally whistled in the early hours of that January morning. But if this was a snap, a sudden, blinding surge of psychological static, it doesn't explain the gaps in the record. You see, the security cameras installed by Raymond Jr., the very ones meant to act as a digital lifeline for a mother recovering in the basement, captured the escalating tension of the argument. They saw the posture, the pointing fingers, and the final ultimatum. But then, as the household crossed the threshold from a dispute to a tragedy, the footage seems to offer more questions than answers. The cameras went dark during the most critical moments, leaving a void where the why should be. Was there a specific word said in those final seconds that acted as a key to a lock? Was there a specific person Raymond was truly looking for that night, or was the entire family simply caught in the wake of a localized storm? Perhaps the most chilling missing piece lies back at that intersection of 36th and Adams. In a night defined by a methodical, silent sequence of events, why did the $40 plea work? In a night of total darkness, was that interaction the only moment of clarity, a brief flash of the brotherly bond that used to exist? Or was it something else? Did Raymond see a reflection of his own humanity in Xavier's terror? Or was the chase simply a secondary thought in a mind already moving toward its own end? We may never truly know what was said in those final desperate seconds under the streetlights. We have the who, the when, and the where, but the why remains buried under the weight of a 3-century sentence. This case forces us to look at the intersection of extreme trauma and ultimate accountability. What do you think a 360-year sentence says about our justice system in 2026? Does it provide the closure the community needs, or is it a symbolic gesture for a tragedy that can never truly be balanced? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Your perspective matters as we continue to untangle the complexities of the human mind here on The Dark Minds.